This is a bit of a weird one. Years ago, I worked in a supermarket in a small town. It was a pretty awful place to work. So many of the employees banded together and were really friendly with each other. One of my coworkers, Ben, wasn't the kind of guy that I would usually be friends with, but he was pretty funny in a quirky offbeat kind of way, and he helped make the days go by faster. He and I were still friendly with each other, and when I left for an office job, he hugged me goodbye on my last day. Cut to several years later, one of mine and Ben's mutual friends posted an article on Facebook and said, "I can't believe I used to be friends with this piece of crap." I read the article and my stomach turned cold. It was a news story about how Ben had gone to prison for doing some really awful things to his son, and then he tried to cover up what he had done. I was pretty disturbed and couldn't believe I had once been friendly with someone who would do such an awful thing. Even more years passed and I moved to a different county and a different job. I now work in an office that has a warehouse attached to it. I work in the office, but the warehouse has a really high turnover. People leave or fire to get hired all the time. One day, I hear the office door open and the guy says he's coming to start working in the warehouse. And it was his first day. I look over my shoulder, and to my horror, I realized this guy could be Ben. He looked older and rougher than the last time that I saw him, but it could be him. I asked for the new guy's name, and yep, it's Ben. I didn't want to spread gossip or start a panic, but I felt that I had to do something. Many of the office employees bring their children to work some days, and even though I doubt Ben is now in the business of just doing what he did again, how do I know what he's capable of? I spoke to the warehouse manager, who was horrified to learn the truth. I showed him the article about what Ben had done, and the warehouse manager told me that Ben had lied on his application and said that he had no criminal convictions. He was fired immediately and was forced to leave the office. This happened when I was a young child, about 5 or 6. I lived in a rural area in my country, and back then, I was taking swimming lessons in the city, which were often long drives back and forth. This happened around Christmas time, and as an early Christmas present, my parents took me out to see a movie after my lessons. The only movie screening that would fit my schedule was during the evening, so the sun was completely down once we had exited the theater. Just a block from the theater is a noodle bar that both my parents absolutely loved to go to, which neighbored my favorite fast food restaurant, so we often ordered food after my lessons. As a late dinner, we all decided to drive down and order our food. My parents would call at the noodle bar and place their order, as we drove through the fast food drive-thru, and I got my burger and chips. The parking lot for the noodle bar is directly in front of the store, and the restaurant had massive windows, including the door, that made up the entire entrance so you could see clearly inside and outside of the restaurant. My mother parked the car in the vacant spot at the noodle bar and went inside to collect and pay while my father sat in the passenger seat and I sat behind him, finishing the last munches of my burger. It was an extra busy night for takeaway orders inside the bar, so my mother took a little longer than usual, which gave me time to stare out the windows up at the stars and the moon, and the empty parking lot and the drunken guys at the club across the street. The only light source outside were coming from the storefronts of the restaurants, since this particular parking lot didn't have any streetlights. As I'm staring outside, I noticed this fit, skinny-looking guy, probably around in his early 20s, with short curly hair and more tan skin walking in the parking lot. He notices me sitting in the back seat in front of the noodle bar and starts to eerily approach the car. He walks directly up to my window and just stares down at me, takes a few glances inside the noodle bar and around the empty parking lot, and then back at me. He walks up towards the passenger seat to the car, and I see him slowly reach for the door handle while still looking around at the noodle bar. I'm guessing for a woman who seems to be waiting for a takeaway order. The guy then finally looks down through the passenger window just as he's about to open the door and sees my father casually sitting there on his phone. I've never seen a guy jump back in complete fear and surprise before in my life. I start laughing quite loudly and this guy makes a quick getaway in front of the car and around the side of the noodle bar. Grabbing the attention of my father, he asks what suddenly got me laughing, and I explained in my innocence as a child. And this guy thought that this was his car and was about to reach for the door handle, but he saw you and ran away. My dad went silent and promptly told me that it's not very funny to laugh at this type of situation, and that he was probably up to no good. When my mother got back, I told her the story, while still giggling, and she completely froze, handed my father the food and started the car. She drove out of the parking lot in the speed of lightning. It's only until recently, after reading through threads and watching videos of stories from other people, that I realized that I too was almost a victim of something awful. I don't want to even think about what would have happened to me, or if I would even be here this far into the future. It scares the crap out of me. This all happened when I was in high school a long time ago. My mom just recently found the paperwork about it when she cleaned out her office upon retiring from the police department. I remember being so upset and scared when it had happened, but rereading the details as an adult, it sounded even worse than I remembered. I was a 17-year-old female working at a flower and gift shop. It's nighttime and a man comes in. Short, overweight, balding, 40s, creepy. He tells me about how he needs to get an apology gift for his girlfriend. So I offer a bouquet, obviously. It's a flower shop. He says that he doesn't like flowers because they die. This was the first weird thing, as he came into a flower shop. And then he goes into detail about how he hit her, and he asks me if he thinks that I was right to do so. It was a long time ago, so I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of, "Not if you wanted to continue being your girlfriend." He then tells me what a great job I'm doing, and asks when I get off of work. I dodge answering, and he leaves. Nothing happens for 6 months, and then right before Valentine's Day, he walks in the door a minute before closing. It was dark, and from the outside it looked like I was working alone, as my coworker, around a 40-year-old female, was in the bathroom. Instinctively, it felt like a predator had just entered the room. You know when something isn't right, and everything felt not right. I then noticed that he had a tarnished revolver tucked into the front of his windbreaker, which was halfway unzipped. It was obvious he wanted it seen. I quickly scribbled a note to my coworker that said, "He has a gun," and handed it to her when she came out of the bathroom. She calmly walked to the phone and looked at me, wordlessly asking if she could call the cops. I shook my head no, as I felt like it would only escalate the situation. God forbid he heard the police coming and took us hostage or something. I was just going to try and act calm and normal as I could, and hopefully not tip the situation into something more dangerous. He spends 15 minutes wandering around what was a fairly small shop. In retrospect, he was probably waiting to see if my coworker would leave, as it was now well past closing. Finally, he places an order for pickup on Valentine's Day, which gives me his name and info, the police report that I'm sure as heck about to file. He buys a card and pulls out a wad of $100 bills, which he slowly thumbs through as though looking for the right one with which to pay for his $40 order. I asked him if he wants a bag, as it wouldn't be very inconspicuous if he just showed up at home with the Valentine's card. He replies, "No, I didn't feel like being inconspicuous tonight," which seemed like an obvious reference to the gun hanging out of his coat. He leaves. We quickly lock the door and watch him sit in his truck outside. We were not about to exit the shop until he was gone. Finally, he pulls out of the parking spot and moves to another spot further away and continues to just sit there. I don't know how long he waited, but he finally left. I called my mom crying. She called the police, who came to the shop the next day to take a report. I told my best friend at the time what happened, and she told her mother. Her mother happened to work with the man and informed security at her job. She said that he was very weird and creepy, and liked to talk about weapons a lot. Security at his job. It's a large company with government contracts and things having to deal with tech and security. Pulled him into the office and questioned him about it. He claimed that it was a glove in his pocket, not a revolver. The police were upset that his company made contact with him about it before they did, and he successfully dodged the cops multiple calls and visits to his apartment. My mom, much to my teen fury at the time, made me quit my job, which was devastating as I loved it there. In retrospect, it was totally the right call. The dude came in on Valentine's Day and picked up his order, and I never saw him again. I'm currently a 21-year-old female, and this happened to me about 6 years ago when I was about 15. I live in a relatively small town where everyone knows everyone. For reference, there were about 120 kids in my graduating class in high school. The town is so small that there's not a lot of ground to cover, so it wasn't unusual for parents to let their teenagers wander around outside with their friends. My friend from a different town had come over to my house because we were going to see my school's musical later that night, and we decided to go wander around outside until it was time to go. She was from a different town, so she was unfamiliar with the area. I suggested that we should go down to my local train tracks because there was a cool cliff or overpass type thing where you can sit and watch the river. I had been to the train tracks with my friends many times before, and people my age used to hang out there all the time. This was sometime in early March, so it was still quite cold where I lived. Even though it was chilly, I remember distinctly that I wore flip-flops for some reason. This will be important later. The train tracks intersected a street in my town which was quite close to my house, so this is where we entered the tracks. We were walking and spotted a middle-aged man who was alone and on the phone. We thought nothing of it and kept walking. We made it to the overpass and were just sitting there hanging out when we noticed the man that we had passed earlier was slowly inching closer and closer. We both noticed this but decided not to panic since it was possible that he was just slowly making his way down the tracks. Maybe 5 minutes had passed and the man was getting increasingly closer and closer to us. At this point, we noticed that he was getting closer at an alarming rate. He was not continuously in motion. It's more like we would notice him standing there, still doing whatever, and then a minute later, he's standing still even closer to us than he was prior. Now he's close enough where we can clearly make him out. He's within an earshot and I could easily get to us if it was his main goal. My friend and I are starting to get nervous. We're two teenage girls in the middle of essentially the woods, with no one around us other than this creepy man. Now, I've watched a lot of investigation discovery in my day, so I think it's best to just try to promptly make my way out of there without creating chaos. I decided it would be a good idea to pull out my phone and pretend to talk to my mom as we begin walking back to the main road. My friend and I are calmly walking down the tracks while I have the phone up to my ear. I'm saying things like, "Yeah, we're on the tracks, we're on our way home." Just making up stuff so this guy thinks my mom is aware of my exact location. There's a point where we have to walk directly past the man in order to make it to our destination. It's at this point where he opens his mouth and says, clear as day, "I know you're not on the phone." At this point, my fight or flight kicks in and I'm terrified. Up until this moment, the creepy man had not directly said or done anything to make us think that he was a direct threat. The situation was uncomfortable enough that my friend and I thought we better head out. And when the man said these words to me, I quickly realized that the perceived threat was both real and dangerous. As soon as my brain registered what he said, my friend and I both ran for our lives. I was never one to enjoy physical activity, let alone running, but I could have won an Olympic medal that day. I ran so fast that my flip-flop broke, and I ended up running barefoot on the gravel that lined the tracks. I was so scared that if I looked back, I would see him running after me, so I didn't. When I finally began running out of steam, I quickly looked back and saw the man standing right where we had left him. He didn't run after us, but I couldn't shake the fear of turning around and seeing him chasing me. When we finally made it to the main road, I quickly called my mom and told her what had happened. She was conveniently driving down the exact road that we were on, and pulled up about 2 minutes later and took us home. My friend and I had never been so scared in our lives. I haven't been to those train tracks since, and to this day, I still think about the man who knew I wasn't on the phone and what his intentions were that day. To better paint the picture, here is a description of myself at the time of this incident, 3 years ago. A 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium length, bleach blonde hair, curvy 175, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that I've gotten myself out of, so I guess I sort of felt invincible, like nothing truly scary could ever happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety, just in case. About halfway home and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed a van started tailing me. I was used to this since in my city it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for you-know-what. It's embarrassing how desensitized I was to this. I did my usual and I crossed the road so that I would be walking beside the traffic heading in the opposite direction. I wasn't scared, so I was really just annoyed. The van then turned down a side street, back onto the road that I was on, and pulled up to me. At this point, I still wasn't scared again. This had happened so many times that it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin, or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankles. That area is notorious for that type of activity. I decided to be firm and told the person sternly, "I'm not interested," and I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical and may have been twins or brothers. Both men had a very, very dark complexion, dark eyes, and short dark hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and I crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured this would be enough for them to stop following me. When they didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a weirdo to leave me alone, so this is when I started feeling unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to screw off, and I thought that it finally worked. It had been 3 minutes and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought that I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I lived with. But just then, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door, and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagine this is what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You're being filmed in my live video chat. I gave my friends your license plate number and the police had been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone more as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van and they sped off. I have never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone now, even during the daytime. Stay safe out there.